we focus on two aspects. One was transportation. Why? Okay, because it's responsible a lot of greenhouse effect, and the other were winding with a focus on insulation, renovation, and so on. So one of the questions was discussed a little bit today. We have milestone to reach for electric car, and the same thing for the renovation and the installation of winding. Are we going to reach this milestone? And the second discussion, where it was really open discussion, is that what is description of the different policies related to climate change of government. So we discuss about the type of solution, technological solution, or behavioral solution, regulation, all kind of regulation, pricing, regulation, penalty that were discussed today, and something which was not discussed today about responsibility. So you may act, and you have not the policeman behind you which allow you to act. You act because you voluntarily you want to change your behavior. And there is another set of policy, one action, which are not chosen. It's just that you are sober because you have a budgetary constraint or because there are resource constraints at the country level, and also this play a role. We spoke about barrier. One is the acceptability barrier that we mentioned today, which is important. The second is that all the tricks that anyone do as soon as there's a regulation to circumvent. And one of the discussion was about company car. There are large number of company cars, so basically which is perfectly legal, so you don't pay social security, and in Belgium, let's say, okay, you buy larger car and you don't pay the gasoline or the electricity. When the gasoline, now they make compulsory electric car in the near future, but you don't face the cost. So that's another problem. And the third problem is the change of political agenda. We discussed that a little bit. So you want to adapt, you want to invest, car company want to invest in technology, and then the regulation change, and this is uncertainty. So if it is well in advance announced, fine, but if it changed because the political agenda change, or because as we may have in France, the government is changing, it's a source of uncertainty which is very costly. The four axes we discuss, the first one is just about research, to say, okay, maybe there are many papers going many directions. Is it possible to make a synthesis? This is not what we want to do, but basically there is maybe too much trend to focus on a very specific point and not to look at the global picture. Second, we thought that it would be interesting to have some entity to monitor policy. So once the policy is done, okay, we kind of forget, okay, we can measure economic measure, and when being measure of the impact of this policy, that can be useful. There was a proposition to do a national European climate agency to give more stability to the policy. And there was a third proposition, which is to think about the harmonization of public policy. There are several public policy, but you may say, are they going the same direction? Some policy go to the concentration, densification of city, and other have an impact of spreading the city. So is there a way to analyze this policy and to analyze their possible contradiction, and what do we have to do about it?
So we had a very tremendous task trying to think about forest and climate change issues. And we got the title, this one, Branching Out to Coordinated PES to manage forest in response to climate change. So we are not going to change everything in forest looking at climate change, because PES, as you may know, are already existing in forest all over the world. But we were going to think about giving new guidelines, thinking about this PES and looking at especially how we can better coordinate people and actors in the forest sector, taking into account adaptation and mitigation. Because as you may know, forest is a perfect example, looking at both adaptation and the mitigation. These two are very linked, and this is something that has still to be looked into research. But forest role in climate change is twofold. It's both a cause and a solution for CO2 emissions. Yes, you have some 25% of global emission that come from land sector, and about half of these that come from deforestation and forest degradation. So forest plays a role both in adaptation and mitigation. So what we have to do if we want to apply some new guidelines for PES, and I will explain what PES is. It's payment for ecosystem services. We have to understand how climate change and also drivers, but how climate change can impact ecosystem services. So we have to make a map, some mapping of a status quo about ecosystem services, and try to understand how climate change will impact each of these ecosystem services and impact their trade-off at different spatial and geographical level, that is local, from national and international one. So what is a payment for ecosystem services? It's an economic tool. It's a voluntary transaction between user and provider, looking at specifically one ecosystem service. So here you have the example of water. And in general, it's most of the time, it's an individual-based instrument looking and taking into account only one ecosystem service. And as it is voluntary, one of the risks that you can have is to observe a fragmented participation of landowners in this PES. So you can have some fragmentation in biodiversity conservation, and that's a problem, especially for biodiversity, but for fight against erosion and so on. So, okay, I will stop here. Our big issue is to think about more collective PES from a spatial issue and from a temporal one, because if we look at this way of doing, we will have a chance to increase all of these PES in a more efficient way. And that is what we mentioned here, taking spatial coordination and temporal coordination, because that is what is really missing in this PES. So we are going to think about these guidelines, having as an objective multi-scale coherence from spatial and temporal coherence. This is not only an economic problem, it's a multidisciplinary one, because we have to map all this ecosystem and to look at the trade-off between this, in a biophysical aspect, all this trade-off we can have between ES. in mapping them. And we have as well a policy level issue because we have to look at forest, but not only forest. We have to think about this PES and take as an objective sector coherence if we look at forest and agriculture and transportation and health. And then the methodology is lacking as well. What kind of methodology we can have to enhance stakeholder participation. So that's all. Thank you.
It was a workshop about human behavior and of course, climate change action. I have some slides here about the objectives, possible action. The objectives are pretty clear, but what we have done here, we went through solutions and said, okay, what are the behavioral challenges of designing this solution, and how can we help with using behavioral model, design this solution better, predict the outcome, optimize, and so on. So that's what we did. I don't have a list of the participants. There were 9 of us from different, from Europe and the US, and the key idea, we started by recognizing that technology is essential for the climate change mitigation, but technology alone cannot do the job. And behavior does matter in terms of reducing demand, but also in terms of designing these actions in the most efficient way. And so there is clear evidence. This is a page from the IPCC, latest IPCC report, talking about demand-side mitigation. And this sort of the concept, the idea that we have multiple objectives. So this shows on one diagram, just shows our conceptually that we think about reducing emissions, keeping lifestyle or well-being, and also taking into account the cost. And we have an example from aviation, because aviation is a sector of that is difficult to mitigate, difficult to reduce emission. And this is an example, a demonstration of the idea that the CO2 emission from aviation is projected to increase into the future, and there is a huge gap that needs to be met. And so the concept of reducing emission can be divided into, in the case of aviation, into actions, technology, action by the airline, and action by the consumers, reducing demand. And these are these 3 elements here. This is technology, this is the behavior of what the airlines do, and this is what consumers do. And all 3 are relevant in terms of, and so we divided the solution or the action into technology development and adoption, infrastructure-driven policies, market-based policies, regulations, information and education, and compensation and redistribution. And then we went through each of these action type, identify the behavioral consideration, and I listed them on many slides here that I'm going to skip. And we ended up with, okay, how can we help? How can we use knowledge and ability to collect data and model behavior? How can we help in designing these solutions and predicting their impact, understanding the source of uncertainty, which is, of course, great. We talked about data collection using modern technology. We came up with a framework and identify a variety of methodological issues that should be the subject of research. Thank you.